A massive, polished church stage gleamed under harsh, precise lighting, each beam slicing through cavernous hall, reflecting off polished wood in golden accents. Thousands of eyes were fixed on the pulpit, their expressions a mix of reverence, anticipation, and subtle judgment. The camera of perception glided across the audience, lingering on eager faces, then on those quietly skeptical. Every pair of eyes telling its own story. Joel Osteen, the embodiment of charismatic authority, stood tall at the center, smiling as if the entire world moved at his rhythm. His gestures were measured, confident, each movement designed to command attention and assert dominance without ever raising his voice. Across the front row, Jonathan Roumie sat with an air of quiet dignity, his posture composed, hands folded, eyes unwaveringly calm, absorbing the room's energy without allowing it to rattle him. The contrast was palpable. Osteen's charisma cloaked in subtle arrogance, Roumie's presence understated yet magnetic, a silent challenge to the carefully curated power around him. The atmosphere was electric, tension coiling like a snake beneath the surface of polite smiles and murmured prayers. In a moment that seemed casual yet charged, Osteen interrupted the ongoing Q&A session, his voice cutting through the room's hum with deliberate precision. "Sit quiet, actor. Let the grown-up speak," he declared, his words sharp, a sting hidden beneath an almost friendly cadence. The hall froze. Silence thickened like a fog, pressing against the audience's ears. Every heart seemed to pause. Roumie's heartbeat echoed inwardly, a steady drum of awareness amidst the sudden stillness. The power dynamics crystallized in that pause, invisible but undeniably felt, the audience caught in the unspoken weight of authority and challenge. Roumie's response was soft but unwavering, a ripple of quiet defiance. "I came to learn not to be silenced." The few murmurs that followed from scattered corners of the crowd carried astonishment and curiosity, electric in their subtlety, an acknowledgment of the collision between command and conscience. The camera of thought lingered on Osteen's face, noting the almost imperceptible flicker of irritation crossing his features, a twitch in his jaw, the tiniest narrowing of his eyes, signals an ego encountering resistance it had not anticipated. Meanwhile, Roumie remained a study in composure, his hands resting gently on his lap, his eyes steady, taking in every glance, every shift in posture, every tiny tremor of control slipping from the hand of a man accustomed to unquestioned authority. The audience's attention wavered between the two, sensing an undercurrent far deeper than a simple exchange of words, a quiet storm gathering beneath polished smiles and controlled gestures. The tension was a living thing, crawling along pews and walls, threading through whispered prayers and cautious glances, growing heavier with each passing second. Observers could almost feel the shifting balance, a subtle reconfiguration of influence as Roumie's calm presence contrasted ever more starkly with Osteen's faltering composure. Eyes that had once followed only the celebrated figure now lingered on the quiet actor, noticing the dignity and restraint, the potency of silence. In that charged space, even the air seemed to tighten, compressing collective anticipation into a single, suspended moment. The narrative weight of the room, the history of controlled voices, silenced critics, and unchallenged authority, pressed against each attendee's consciousness, creating an invisible but palpable tension, a prelude to the unfolding reckoning. No one could yet articulate it, but a subtle shift had begun, imperceptible to the casual observer yet undeniable to anyone attuned to the nuances of power and presence. Every gesture, every blink, every breath now carried significance, and the moment stretched, suspended between the familiar rituals of ceremony and the brewing disruption of expectations. The quiet dignity of Roumie, juxtaposed with the carefully maintained arrogance of Osteen, had turned an ordinary exchange into a battlefield of silent authority, a confrontation without raised voices, yet more potent than any shouting match. And as the congregation sat in hushed anticipation, the undercurrent of change rolled through the hall like a wave waiting to crest, leaving one thought lingering in the charged silence. No one in that room realized that tonight the power would quietly, irrevocably shift. The charged silence of the hall lingered even after the initial exchange, settling like a dense fog that refused to lift, and as eyes continued to flick between Osteen and Roumie, the past began to unfurl in subtle, almost imperceptible waves. Memories of previous encounters, hidden from the public eye, surfaced like shadowed fragments of a carefully maintained facade, a church volunteer whose voice had been dismissed years ago when she raised concerns about favoritism, a reporter hesitating to press questions for fear of reprisal, a fellow actor quietly warned off from speaking out after a minor critique threatened the polished image Osteen curated. Each micro-story, almost invisible at the time, now seemed to echo in the present room, adding weight to the tension that vibrated through the polished pews and marble floors. Narration traced the contours of systemic arrogance, revealing the subtle mechanisms of control Osteen had long wielded. Charisma weaponized into authority, charm masking intimidation, smiles concealing judgment, and polite corrections that effectively silenced those who dare to challenge him. Against this backdrop, Roumie's own story intertwined seamlessly, his calm in the front row now illuminated by shadows of struggle, typecast and dismissed for his appearance, whispered about in corridors of casting offices and media circles, often overlooked not for lack of talent, but because the intersection of his faith and identity defied the comfortable narratives others preferred. The quiet power of his presence in the hall was amplified by this unseen history, his restraint carrying layers of unspoken resilience. In the moments between exchanges, backstage whispers floated to the quiet. "You sure you want to say anything?" The words barely audible yet loaded with doubt, reflecting the hesitation born of prior experiences and the unspoken understanding of the stakes involved. Roumie's internal dialogue remained steady, meditative even, tracing thoughts of dignity and restraint, reminding himself that the silent assertion of truth could pierce deeper than any raised voice. The tension rippled outward when a reporter, discreetly aiming a camera toward the unfolding scene, captured the subtle intimidation Osteen attempted, the gesture, the narrowing of eyes, the minute shift of posture now broadcast live, exposing cracks in the carefully maintained exterior. Among the audience, perceptive eyes began to notice, whispers passed through rows, glances exchanged in sudden understanding, a quiet unease spreading like a slow, deliberate tide. Narration followed Osteen's subtle faltering, a hand that lingered too long, a smile that failed to mask tension, the first hints of unease in the confident armor he relied upon. Brief, poignant dialogues punctuated the undercurrent. An assistant murmured under a breath, "This isn't what he planned," while a nearby audience member muttered, "He can't act like this in front of everyone." Each statement concise yet heavy with implication, acknowledgement of the cracks forming. The emotional undercurrent deepened as the system's rot was revealed, not through shouts or public confrontation, but through these quiet acknowledgments, the tiny, almost invisible shift of awareness in the room. The audience's collective gaze and the subtle reactions of those closest to Osteen began to rearrange the balance of power. Observation itself became a force, as social awareness and quiet recognition of truth started to undermine authority. Roumie's calm presence contrasted against Osteen's faltering composure, each measured breath, each patient pause a counterweight to decades-controlled narratives. The hall, once a place of unquestioned reverence, became a stage for this quiet unveiling of truth, tension weaving through every corner, the past injustices and silenced voices lending gravity to the present moment. Every flicker of doubt on Osteen's face, every subtle acknowledgement of unease in the audience, layered with narration of systemic misuse and personal resilience, converged toward the inevitable crescendo, the moment when restrained dignity and quiet courage will begin to tip the scales, leaving an indelible mark on both the public eye and the private conscience. The hall's energy shifted imperceptibly yet irrevocably. The careful choreography of authority met the calm persistence of integrity, and the unspoken promise of change began to take root, threading through whispers, glances, and the silent, unwavering presence of one man who refused to be diminished. The room hummed with an almost electric anticipation as the live-stream charity gala began, cameras pivoting to capture every gesture, every expression, the polished chandeliers scattering light across the expectant crowd. Joel Osteen, still wearing a massive composure, took the stage once more, his confident posture belying the subtle tension threading through his movements. The audience, both in person and online, had begun to notice the faint fissures in his polished exterior, a curiosity mingled with unease rippling through the room. As Osteen opened with familiar, practiced tone, a slight edge crept into his voice, a veiled attempt to reclaim dominance. A subtle put-down aimed at Roumie, meant to remind the world of his authority. Yet Roumie remained poised, his calm a tangible force, each breath measured, hands still folded, eyes steady, absorbing the energy without deflection. Without flinching, he leaned slightly forward, his voice carrying the quiet power of truth. Faith doesn't need fear to grow. Silence isn't weakness, it's dignity. The words, simple yet profound, hung in the air like a bell, resonating far beyond the immediate moment. A flicker of hesitation passed over Osteen's face, a tightening at the corners of his eyes, a subtle downward tilt of the lips. Small gestures amplified under the scrutiny of countless lenses. Narration lingered on these micro-expressions, capturing the internal fracture beneath the performative exterior, the collision between carefully cultivated pride and the unyielding calm of integrity. The audience shifted imperceptibly, some leaning forward, eyes narrowing with recognition, others exchanging glances that spoke volumes, allegiance wavering in the quiet revelation of contrast between arrogance and dignity. Symbolism wove itself into the scene almost imperceptibly. Roumie bathed in consistent, even light of the stage, every line of his face, every controlled motion highlighted with clarity, while Osteen receded subtly into shadow, the room's illumination drawing attention not to his gestures, but to his faltering confidence. Each sentence Roumie spoke, each pause, each measured glance, carried weight, and the narration emphasized the poetic justice unfolding. No dramatic outburst, no raised voice, only the quiet, undeniable power of presence and truth asserting itself in a world accustomed to spectacle. As Osteen's subtle facade of control wavered, the audience's collective awareness crystallized. Social media feeds erupted with captured moments, hashtags forming almost spontaneously, viewers online noting the unspoken collapse of authority, the reversal of expectation, the triumph of restraint over intimidation. Roumie's breathing remained steady, a metronome to the rising tension, while Osteen's hands, previously gestures of command, now trembled ever so slightly, betrayed by micro-movements, each twitch magnified under the intense gaze of the live cameras. Narration drew attention to these small but telling shifts, the internal unraveling far more compelling than any external dramatics, the audience perceiving a subtle victory before a single overt action was needed. The gala, meant to showcase generosity and spectacle, became instead a stage for a quiet reckoning, the tension between humility and hubris displayed in every facial expression, every shifted posture, every hushed murmur that passed between attendees. Roumie's steady presence and Osteen's faltering dominance created a visual and emotional narrative that needed no embellishment. The contrast itself told a story of justice quietly delivered. The metaphor of light and shadow, of control and quiet dignity, underscored the larger theme, that true authority is not claimed through intimidation or fear, but through calm, unwavering integrity. As the cameras continued to roll, capturing every micro-reaction, the room seemed suspended, caught between the remnants of long-held power and the undeniable emergence of moral clarity. The collective energy in the room had shifted, invisible but undeniable, a tide of awareness that could not be retracted. And as Roumie maintained his composure, the narration concluded with a sense of inevitability that had begun to take root. Tonight, humility and truth took the stage, while arrogance quietly stepped off. The echo of the gala lingered long after the cameras powered down, spreading through news outlets, social media threads, and quiet conversations whispered between acquaintances who had witnessed the subtle unraveling of a carefully maintained image. Headlines dissected the micro-expressions, analysts replayed clips, and hashtags documenting the moment trended with surprising speed, each post quietly fracturing Osteen's public persona, the charismatic veneer showing cracks previously unseen. In the quiet of his home, Roumie reflected, pen in hand, letting the events pour into a journal, tracing thoughts with deliberate care, each word a meditation on restraint, dignity, and the quiet power of speaking truth. Slow walks in the evening air offered space for contemplation, a rhythmic cadence to match his internal clarity, while a moment of prayer grounded him further, a steadying ritual amidst the residual hum of public attention. Intimate family scenes reinforced this groundedness. Laughter over shared meals, gentle conversation with loved ones, small acknowledgments that life continued with integrity intact, the weight of justice settling quietly but unmistakably. Around him, subtle symbols of change began to appear, unnoticed by the wider world yet potent in meaning. Empty pews in the church once filled with unquestioning admiration, emails left unopened by those who had sought to curry favor, invitations unreturned, photographs that now seem to capture a past era of unquestioned authority. Each quiet scene echoed the slow erosion of influence, a visual testament to the shifting balance of power, the cumulative effect of small but significant acts of observation and awareness. In the community, change rippled outward in unexpected ways. A volunteer raised a hand to voice concern that had long been ignored. A congregation member dared to question leadership decisions with polite but pointed inquiry. Each action a subtle reinforcement of the lesson that authority must always be accountable to truth. Roumie's final reflection, whether shared in public remarks or held privately in an internal monologue, crystallized the thematic core. True power is not in speaking over others, but in standing beside them. These words, simple yet resonant, capture the quiet moral victory, the enduring impact of dignity wielded with intention. Narration emphasized the subtlety of justice achieved, etched not in dramatic gestures or public shaming, but in the invisible reshaping of perception, the enduring imprint on minds and hearts, the small but profound shifts in understanding that would ripple outward long after the event itself had passed. As the days turned to weeks, the story lingered in the consciousness of the audience, a quiet benchmark of integrity against arrogance, a lesson in the potency of calm resolve over performative dominance. The interplay of observation, reflection, and measured action became a blueprint for others, a reminder that change often arrives not with fanfare, but with persistence, patience, and the steady insistence of truth. Even in the absence of overt confrontation, the subtle consequences spoke volumes. Reputations shifted, trust recalibrated, and social awareness deepened. Roumie's presence, unwavering and composed, remained a touchstone, a silent affirmation that moral clarity could prevail without spectacle, that dignity maintained in the face of provocation could exert influence far beyond the immediacy of any stage or microphone. The residual tension in the community transformed into cautious optimism, a recognition that the balance of power, once presumed immutable, could indeed be questioned, held accountable, and redefined through courage tempered with patience. In these quiet, almost imperceptible ways, justice found its voice not in shouting, not in dramatic confrontation, but in the consistent, deliberate assertion of presence, observation, and principle. The narrative of the evening, captured in reflections, whispers, and subtle acts of change, left a lasting imprint, a reminder that truth and dignity need not clash with spectacle to prevail, that the quiet unfolding of awareness can reshape authority, and that the moral arc of justice, though subtle, bends with a patience and inevitability that those who wield power often fail to anticipate. The world shifted in imperceptible ways, yet the transformation was undeniable, leaving a trail of altered perceptions and a lingering understanding that integrity, once exercised with patience and restraint, resonates far beyond the immediate moment, embedding itself in consciousness and community alike.